Yeah, no, thanks for being flexible and for inviting me to this talk to the conference. And it's fabulous to be at an international conference for PCT, and to see local people coming as well, and to just be there for another year of PCT research and application. And I've deliberately decided to talk on the applications of PCT to real world issues, and I'm deliberately covering the people and the progress, what we've been up to, and really to the extent to which we've started to fulfill Bill's vision of a different world and a different way of thinking and a different attitude to one another, through the lens of his theory. Okay, so if we really have those kind of ambitions, we need to think broadly. So we need to think, where do we want to be using PCT? And I think really as broadly as possible. And I've just got some examples here on the screen of the different kinds of contexts where we can be bringing in PCT informed interventions. We also need to ask how we're going to provide those interventions. And again, on here, and I'll be covering these in detail, there are different media through which we can interact with people in a way that fulfills the PCT principles. And thirdly, who are we working with? I think, again, widely, we want to be working with a diverse community of diverse ages and diverse backgrounds. On this slide, I'm sharing with you some of the partners of the research and the practice that I've been involved with, to varying degrees. And as you can see, it includes academic, and both private and public health organisations. And I'll go into these in a bit more detail. In terms of the geography, a lot of our work happens in the centre of Manchester, but we've also got three particular regions in West Manchester, that's Salford, in Rochdale and in Stockport, which are Greater Manchester. And we've also got people working in some other cities around the UK, Sheffield, Nottingham and London. And I'm also going to be sharing the work from Australia, Alice Springs from Tim Carey, who you'll all be familiar with, and some recent work from Tom Schultz in Vancouver. So this slide shows all of you the people who have been working on these projects. Some of them are researchers, some of them are practitioners, some of them are both, and their work varies from studying basic principles and mechanisms right through to just applying these interventions on the coalface. And so I'm just going to report on the fabulous work that these people have been doing. Before we start on that, it's important, isn't it, to remind ourselves of what is the perspective that Bill provided. And it's important to remind ourselves that this perspective started in his very first publication in 1960, where actually the implications for awareness and psychological distress were already spelt out. He put to us in those articles that life is control and that well-being is control. Obviously, that behaviour is a control of perception, the control of our inputs, and I'm sure you've heard, you've been talking a lot about that already today. That distress is the lack of control. It's where we experience error, where we experience not achieving what we want. And there are various factors that can undermine our control. But Bill pointed to maybe the most pernicious factor, which is conflict, having two opposing reference points for the same experience, the same perceptual target. Let me give you one clinical example. A client who I work with who experienced trauma in her past and had really almost forgotten about the possibility of bringing her perpetrator to justice. But when this opportunity arose and she needed to testify in court, she experienced a worsening of symptoms because now she was pitched in conflict with herself, Because on the one hand, she wanted to carry on forgetting these terrible things, but on the other hand, she knew she needed to remember them in detail in order to be a credible witness. And I think that's a real clear example of where conflict undermines our control, our sense of self, and puts us in really risky states. And there's a paper by myself, Tim, Sarah Tai, and Doug Turkington who elaborates on this in trauma in the Lancet Psychiatry. Anyway, to continue, what Bill described was that spontaneous changes needed to be required in the system above the conflicted control systems. So those goals that are in conflict, so for example to experience a traumatic memory and to prevent the experience of a traumatic memory, somehow changes need to happen above that, where people set those goals for themselves. And Bill, as you know, specified a change process called reorganisation, which is an intrinsic process that we're born with. Trial and error changes require a sustained period of time to eventually tumble towards some kind of configuration of our goals and the components of our control systems that reduces this conflict, and we eventually regain control. But because it's a trial and error process, it might not happen first time. And because it needs to be sustained, that has implications for how we keep our focus on a particular problem for a period of time. It's not about thinking or doing the right thing. There's no such thing as a dysfunctional behaviour or dysfunctional thinking process, according to PCT. Recovery takes time. It may get worse before it gets better. The ability to shift and sustain your awareness to your goals, to gradually go up the levels to be able to articulate and express more long-term and abstract goals, such as your personal ideals and values, is clearly important. And this process is clearly more experiential than logical. And actually it's something that Bill and Tim Carey have argued comes naturally to most of us about most everyday problems and conflicts that we solve. And that's because we allow ourselves to bring our awareness to those and to talk and think about them. And it's the very reason that we don't allow those that allows the distress to persist. Does that sound like the description of what causes distress that the group that you would all agree with? Have I got anything wrong? No? Okay. Super. So let me remind you about method of levels therapy. Method of levels therapy is a direct implementation of PCT, and as many of you know, it was actually used by Bill to introspect about PCT, and it puts a person's control at the heart of both how they book appointments, the length of the session, and what they choose to talk about. That's down to them. And this is based on the fact that feeling comfortable is about being in control, and being in control of your life is about well-being. Method of levels therapy had its origins with Bill Powers right back in the 1950s when he was developing the theory, but it wasn't until the 1990s in work with Tim Carey that it was distilled into a trainable form of psychological therapy like the ones that I'll be talking about today. And Tim worked very closely with Bill to produce that first manual. What is a therapy? You do two things as a therapist, which is unlike what most therapists do, which is often a whole handful of things. You have one goal: to help the client talk about the problem and to ask about disruptions. And asking about disruptions means that as a therapist, as an observer, you've noticed something, some glitch in the stream of verbalization, such as a pause or a smile or a change in eye movement, something that's at the edge of awareness rather than in that vocal stream. And you're just noticing it and just putting it back to the person, saying, "Oh, what made you smile just then?" Or what's going through your mind just now? if you've noticed a person pause, for example. So you're trying to bring those perceptions and those goals at the edge of a person's awareness. You're helping them of their own accord, if they want to bring that to awareness and continue this discussion. And what we notice is that brings people's awareness to where the conflicts are, and beyond that to the high level goals that seem to be driving this. And that's all we do. We keep on doing that, and we keep on asking those questions. And the aim is that we're giving patients control through this whole process, even in terms of how it's provided to people. And ultimately we're shifting attention to where it needs to go, and we're helping it stay there long enough so that people start to resolve their problems for themselves. Okay, so that's method levels therapy. Am I going all right? Yeah, thank you. Cheers. Okay, so what I'm going to do now really is just describe to you the context and the people, how we're providing that, and a little bit of an update of where we're at. So here is a list of some challenging contexts that colleagues of mine have been using method levels therapy. So there are several that have been providing method levels in schools, high schools, both to the pupils there and to the teachers. And that's through both the charity that Susan McCormack runs called Mode Rehabilitation, and through a social enterprise that my wife Louise and her co-director Kirsty Hughes runs. And we've done research on this, and we're getting really good feedback from those children about how this is working for them, and how it's really a breath of fresh air to be able to choose when they come to appointments what they talk about and whether they think they've got a problem or not. And I'll share some quotes with you on that later. Sarah and Viv, so Sarah Ty and Viv Huddy, have both separately been providing method levels on inpatient wards. And I'm just going to jump to Sarah's slide here on inpatient wards, because she provided method levels over a 2-year period. She made sure that she saw every single patient that got on the ward and introduced herself, and just said to them, if you want to see me, just come and book on the schedule on my door. You don't have to, and it doesn't matter how many times you come or for how long for, it's totally up to you. And actually 75% of people approximately came to see her. That's much higher than the people that normally get the kinds of therapy provided in an inpatient setting, because it's often presumed that if someone's either not willing to have a course of therapy, or that their problems aren't of the typical symptom kind that they want to talk about, like not getting on with the staff, for example, that's not a valid use of the therapeutic time. Whereas Sarah would see anybody for any reason for any length of time. Actually, over half of them came for more than one session, and some of them managed to have 18 sessions. That's a whole course of therapy while they're an inpatient. And they valued the booking system. Sometimes people didn't even book, they just came straight in, so they could talk about what was on their mind while it was on their mind. Staff came in and used it as well. It was adaptable, so she could use it in evenings, and it just meant that it just gave a huge range of opportunities for seeing people in a way that our traditional forms of therapy just don't allow. In a related piece of work, myself and Sarah are supervising Rob Griffiths, and he's used method levels with people after their first episode of psychosis in an outpatient setting, again using their own booking schemes, and again he's getting some really good feedback from those patients, and he's writing that up. That is an NIHR, which is our National Health Service Research funding scheme, has supported that as a fellowship, and Rob's really pushing forward with this work to expand upon it. Viv's provided method levels in prisons, again a really difficult regime, and again a one where it's all the more important that a therapist doesn't necessarily fit into the same controlled, structured requirements as the rest of the system. Susan's provided method levels over in Texas to several men who were on death row, who were knowing that they were coming to be killed, but wanted to come to terms in some way with what they'd done in their lives, and having very little opportunity to do that. And Susan can talk quite movingly about how method levels can help a person to do that, because it passes no judgment. It just lets people sort out and order out their conflicts, regardless of whether there's any kind of there's no requirement for reality testing in this process. It's literally about helping people order things out for themselves. Very recently, we've been trialling method levels as a potential counter-radicalisation intervention. Again, it's so important that there's a way of talking to people that is non-coercive, that you can weave into a community, and that you can provide on an ad hoc basis. And our early indications, we've just done 2 master's projects on this, are that it's amenable and feasible. Mark Reynoldson at Nottingham is using method levels for cancer treatment. For some people, for example, with long cancer treatment periods where they have to be isolated from others for weeks upon weeks, people's minds plays funny tricks on them in those kind of contexts. And Mike has been looking into how method levels can help people to really manage those periods of isolation, for example, as well as other issues around cancer treatment. Sarah's recently started working using method levels in a large trial, helping people with recurrent depression, and Vanessa, a research assistant working with us, has focused on method levels, focusing on it as a suicide prevention method. And this is not using the methods that we see in the literature, which is often around identifying risk factors and creating some complex algorithm to predict who's going to commit suicide and who isn't, because it's not about prediction. It's about helping identify what the final pathway within that individual is that they can do something about to turn things around. And we would put that down to their awareness of their goals and the implications of their goals for other goals that they have in their life. Okay, so there's method levels in some challenging contexts. Here are some examples. There's of some mobile apps that we've developed using PCT. Tim Carey invented MindSurf, which is an app that you can sign up to, and it asks you method levels style questions sporadically during the day to help you kind of notice and balance your goals. Sarah's application's a really cool cartoon app called Pin It or Bin It. And when you get a thought or a feeling that disturbs you or that pops into your head, you just decide, do I want to keep thinking about this? Is it important? Or do I want to let it go? And it's just a way of applying that mental filter to what comes into your head. Milo is a piece of artificial intelligence where you can have a conversation with the computer. It encourages you to talk about a problem. It scans your text and it asks you method level style questions about the last thing that you said to help you continue to express and elaborate and describe your problem, thereby hopefully sustaining your awareness on it. And Confidence is an app that was created by a friend and colleague of mine, Angus, and Tim Newton, which is a way that people who are anxious about going to the dentist can start to take control of their own treatment, so that having their dental treatment is a more smooth and comfortable process. And most of these have got publications and work on them, but I'm not going to focus on those because this is about a kind of helicopter view of what we're up to. We've also got a group intervention called the Take Control course. This manual was published in the last month or so by Elsevier, and it's a 6-week course that basically empowers patients to understand the principles of perceptual control theory in really accessible ways so they can apply it to their own lives. And we're also applying it in high schools at the moment in a very adapted way with movies and films and more sort of craft and social activities that the pupils are really enjoying. It's also the case that Sarah has done group interventions in inpatient wards and in workplaces based on PCT. And also PCT lends itself to systemic approaches. Sarah's been working with staff on inpatient wards, as I said, not just train them in the principles, but looking at their interactions and the way that they interact with patients. We've got a PhD student, Anna Churchman, who's coming to the end of her thesis, and as well as evaluating method levels, she's developed what's called a shared goals task to help parents and high school children to resolve the kinds of conflicts that get them into difficulties with one another by identifying shared goals, if you like, going up a level and looking at what goals they share in common. There's also the early work using PCT in family contexts and sharing very simple formulations around conflict in family systems in a way that hopefully illuminates what's going on for the young person. And over in Vancouver, Tom Schultz is using forum theatre, which is a way of he uses it again in workplaces for workplace conflict. It's a way of resolving social conflicts through acting in spontaneous, impromptu manner. And there's a person called the Joker who facilitates this process. And Tom is working on training those jokers up in method levels to help actors to really get inside the characters and to think and to actually allow some reorganised solution to emerge during forum theatre. Okay. Oops, I just jumped 2 there. And go back 1 again. Yes, and another feature where we've been using PCT along with some other theoretical approaches is it's been led by Phil McAvoy at Social Enterprise in Salford. We've got 2 theoretical papers published using PCT to understand control and communication in people with dementia and their families and carers. And Phil runs carer workshops, and he's devising remote telephone and video conferencing support for carers of people with dementia to help facilitate communication. And you can read those papers if you really want to see how PCT has empowered those individuals with dementia. Let me just share with you some quotes of how this is all going. So this is a quote from Rob's trial on psychosis. By me being able to talk about it in the way that I'm talking about it now, it helps. More important, that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that I'm able to say things and hear myself say things. And you'll ask me, how does it feel when you're actually saying those words? And I'll say, it makes me feel this way, it makes me feel great, or whatever. So it helps a lot. Or another patient that said, well, it's just made me realise a lot of things I didn't care about previously. Like I didn't care if I ended up, I was dead or whatnot, or alcoholic on the street, whatever. It's just put it all into more perspective of how life is being, how different life could actually be that I wasn't looking at previously, and it has helped, I reckon. Or in schools, we can decide what we want to and to go when we're ready, because it's like we're not getting an appointment slip, we're deciding, we're choosing, and we're making sure that we get it done. When I went to therapy, it definitely relieved a lot of distress. It helped me overcome my stress as well. It helped me think a lot more about where I'm going to now instead of what happened in the past. It was good. I feel better, actually having a therapy. I feel like I can tell people a lot more things and just feel like I'm not as bad. I was like with stress and all that. I feel a lot better now after the therapy. The Take Control course in adults. So it made me realise that things that I could have an impact on and things that I couldn't. I think mainly it was being able to break everything down and not having to focus on controlling the bigger picture when you can build up the smaller parts first, then build it up. And it means that I did become, I've always been, but I became more compassionate really with people. Or the Take Control course in schools. I use the elastic band idea to think about when I feel conflicted and what to do. I think my emotions now was what is helpful and what isn't. I now think, why is this important to me? We're also doing research, not just in a qualitative way, but in some qualitative and quantitative research to get to these mechanisms and to show scientific evidence for them. So Vanessa, I mentioned earlier, has shown that method of levels therapy truly is very different from other forms of therapy in a number of ways. The therapist talks for a shorter period of time than the client, about a third of the amount of the time, but has many more utterances than any other kind of therapy. So it's as though the therapist is providing these questions as scaffolding to kind of keep the client in control of the topic, as we would expect. Caitlin Cannon has done conversational analysis looking at the role of asking about disruptions and how that impacts on the next topic discussed. Cuba and Sally have both been working on a scale, an observer scale, that tries to get a sense of where a person's awareness is and to try and track that awareness during an MOL session. And also Sally with Lydia and Tim Bird developed a self-report scale that tries to tap into that sense of whether people are able to let these thoughts and feelings and goals sit in their awareness. We've also studied how much control people have over traditional exposure therapy and showed that if you give people control over how they face their fears, the outcomes seem better. And in those kind of work, we've also looked at how being aware of the conflict you're in, the ambivalence about whether or not to face your fears, seems to be associated with better outcomes. And Viv has done some amazing work modelling psychological change as reorganisation in large groups to show that when you provide therapy to people in services, the kind of change profiles you see is what you might expect from a reorganisation model. But there's still a lot left to do and a lot that I haven't mentioned. I think one of the main areas is what I've called the roots of control and conflict in infancy, and indeed the roots of how to manage conflict through things like play and being listened to. And people have worked on this and are working on it. And obviously Fred Good did a lot of work on connected school. Tim's published books on education, and Franz Ployer's published work on child development. We would want to get involved in more of that, in evaluating more of those interventions and how they're being used right now. I've also been thinking about how PCT can help in very immediate cases. We talked about inpatients, but there's also the kind of idea of mental health first aid, for example in the workplace, but also in traumas and in disaster and crisis situations. And I really think, looking at what else is out there, that it's the way that the therapy, an intervention gives someone control, that is the active ingredient. Sarah's started looking at MOL as a way of helping patients choose whether to take medication or not, and how much medication to take, which is a very challenging and recurrent issue, especially in mental health services. Matt Leeming and again Sarah have been looking at substances in quite a different way. Matt's looking at treating substance use with MOL, and Sarah's actually been involved in looking at how the substance of psilocybin, which is the essence of magic mushrooms, how the effects of that might be stabilised and made therapeutic through combining it with method levels. There's some emerging work helping military veterans, particularly getting back to employment, that Susan McCormack's been involved with. I've had some talks with people about probation services and method levels. And also Sarah and myself have talked about method levels in more of an informal co-counselling way, in a peer support way. And it's something that we have no bones about. The first time that I saw Tim up in Fife, when I witnessed method levels, he gave me a method level session, and it was very helpful. And since then, I've asked for method levels from friends and who are trained, and I've offered method levels to friends, because if you can't help the people close to you, who can you help? Moving to a slightly different area, my PhD student Max Parker has just submitted. He's actually been doing a lot of computational modelling that kind of edges over into robotics. But the aim of that work was actually to build up robotic rehabilitation for stroke. People who've had stroke. So we do want to move forward with that. I've had the occasional chat with Kent about method levels and what it tells us about mediation and international relations. That's literally a toe in the water. We use method levels in our clinical supervision, but we've never really evaluated it. We want to be able to accredit method levels, but we don't have the resources or the funding to do it yet. But you can obviously see the importance of that. I've talked to you about lots of different types of research that we're quite comfortable with. What I would say are our blind spots are testing, putting our money where our mouth is, and testing the psychotherapeutic implications of PCT using functional modelling testing, model testing rather than traditional group statistics. And to complement that, almost the other end of the spectrum, is still to try and get large-scale trials to make a more convincing case that these kind of things can be rolled out. Just going to leave you with a few pictures. The top left is a video on YouTube that Susan commissioned for mode rehabilitation, a really nice cartoon explaining method levels that you might be interested in. Top right is Tom, who flew over twice now from Vancouver to meet us and everyone here over in Manchester, and that's him at Nurture Psychology, sharing method levels experiences. Bottom left is a friend or colleague of my wife who came in on a Children in Need Day, a charity event that we organised to help people face their fears. And she's pointing at that spider because she couldn't even look at a page of with a spider on it before, and we used exposure therapy delivered completely under her control as a way of doing that, and it was a fun day as well that we had. Bottom right are copies of our manual from the staff of 6 Degrees, who look very pleased at having eventually received that in the post. So I think I've timed that okay. I'd like to thank you all for your time and point you to where you can kind of get more material and get in touch with me. I always tweet about a new publication or a new video. PCT Web is a resource that links into the different papers on PCT. I've got a YouTube channel. I've just uploaded a new video today, and I hope to upload this one. And then finally, there's my university website. So thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting a bit with you for the next 10 minutes or so.
Easier for you to hear us?
I can hear you fine for now.
Okay, so if anyone wants to ask a question, you may use this. Okay.
Lauren, come out of screen sharing.
Oh yeah, what a good idea.
Hello, Warren. This is Brian D'Agostino. I want to come back to the question about what is chronic psychological distress, and I'm wondering if there are maybe for certain kinds of psychological distress, for example, traumatic memories, people who suffer from traumatic memories, whether there's two distinguishable components to the distress. If someone was subjected to some aversive situation that involved pain, like being beaten as a child, for example, or in some other situation, maybe the parent was withholding love, I'm wondering if there's some intrinsic needs or reference perceptions, such as the avoidance of pain or attachment, that might have been chronically violated, and that, well, control was also violated, there's something more to this than just
Yeah.
a violation of control, and whether MOL can address that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's about how we define the term control. Bill defines the term in a functional way. He doesn't distinguish, for example, between need and control. Need is just a different type of control about a more fundamental, biologically derived intrinsic goal. So, yeah, it's all about people's needs not being met, of various kinds. And Bill proposed that there would be certain fundamental intrinsic goal states that we're born with. One of those will be freedom from pain, most likely. One of those will be warmth and comfort. We'll have a reference point for that. There'll probably be another one around play and the kind of excitement and that felt sense that you get during play. And those are human needs, but under Bill's framework, they are intrinsic goals that we're born with. And our perceptual hierarchy is how we learn to meet those intrinsic needs through the way that we detect and reduce the discrepancy between what we perceive and how we want it to be. And so, for example, we'll start to realize that there are particular people in our environment who it's good to be able to recognize quickly and get near you because they're the ones that are going to look after you. That's your perceptual hierarchy developing in your lifetime to meet your intrinsic need of that safety and freedom of pain. I've written about it in a book on dissociation that's edited by Fiona Kennedy and Helen Kennelly. But it's all ripped off from Bill. He already said it all.
Any other questions?
Warren, this is Bruce Abbott.
Hello.
Hi. You've talked about MOL as being used in cases of conflict, but there are other ways in which people can fail to adequately control the things that matter.
Yeah.
A person may have ineffective means of control, or
Yeah.
developed means that sort of work, but they also cause a lot of side effects that produce other problems. Like
That's kind of it's coming in the domain of conflict, that one. But
and
yeah.
How does that fit into the therapy?
Yeah, okay. If, as you probably know, it fits into the theory very elegantly because Bill and Tim have described how conflict isn't the only thing that undermines control. It's not having the ability, the skills. It's not having the environment. It's insuperable disturbances. It's not having a reference point for something, a goal that you can clearly identify. So the theory, I think, maps on very neatly to that common sense idea of what can undermine control. What we do in method levels therapy is focus on the awareness and conflict aspect because we find that left to their own devices or given some simple signposting, people can provide for themselves that information. And so we don't want to waste our time as a therapist who's having this really close attention to the problem they're discussing to hand them out a leaflet to read about skills training or to kind of learn some new information about the fight or flight response, etc., etc. We would not include that in method levels therapy, partly because method levels therapy needs to keep parsimonious because that's its essence and its importance. But also we think it would interfere with the stream and the principles. But the Take Control course, because that is not about holding people's awareness whilst they're on the course, it's about giving them information, that has got some of these descriptions and pointers in it because you're catering there to a large group of people. They're not all got their awareness on the same zone at the same time, and we're actually just helping them to be informed about what control is and how helping to know what you want can help you get what you need, and how managing conflict with others, for example, can be a way of working towards your goals. So the Take Control course, because it's not about holding people's awareness, has tackles or addresses those, and as you've probably seen in schools, and actually in primary care mental health, we provide both so that they can complement one another. But whether or not you need both is another question. But I think they complement. They have different functions. But hopefully that explains why method levels itself needs to remain parsimonious. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other helpful things that you can tell people or do with people that give them more control.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Warren. My name is Ty Austin.
Hello.
The Ty rhymes with Sarah's last name. So instead of AI, mine is just Y. And so I'm a graduate student here. So I'm just coming to Northwestern for the first time, but I've been following the Control Systems Group and your publication since about 2012.
Brilliant.
So I'm at a stage where I think I'm ready to ask some questions. But my one quick question for you right now is asking if you've heard of the Council of Coaches concept.
No.
Yes or no? Okay. So it was a project funded out of the European Union, and it references one of your papers. And it has a connection to coaching strategies that includes PCT.
Huh.
So your reaction is all I was looking for right this second.
Okay. Yeah, send me the link.
I'll teach you 2 sentences, because I've been working on this all summer under an independent project in my graduate school program. So, but the one sentence I can read to you is that the Council of Coaches, and they use the acronym COACHES, project is based in the EU, is developing a council of multiple embodied conversational coaches to provide a tailored coaching on various domains. So that's just the first sentence. So I just thought I'd share that, but I'll
Yeah. Can you email me or tweet me the details?
Yeah, definitely
Cheers.
will. And so your paper with Tim Carey was referenced with a couple of others from your 2008 paper that you two published together.
Great. Super.
Okay, wonderful. Any more questions? One more? Okay. Lunch has arrived, so, but I don't want to cut Warren off because we love to have you here. Okay.
Hi, Warren. My
Hello.
name is Abby. So basically my question is kind of funny because you're talking about therapy. I kind of experienced this in my own course through therapy. The one thing that I've taken from my therapist more than anything is like I used to be the type that would, be rambling on and say, oh, she just did that to make me angry, and she'd cut me off real quick, like, Abby, you really think she was thinking about you at all when she was doing that? It's kind of as simple as understanding where someone else is coming from. So I guess my question, in terms of like conflict and things like that, it's really beneficial to teach people how to, establish goals and reach that. But almost, would you agree that it's just as important to kind of understand that sometimes things are just out of reach, and kind of understanding why, you're frustrated, or maybe it's not worth it being that frustrated because you're at, you don't have the means to accomplish it right now. It's almost like if it was a general psychology book going through high school, it's like if people just kind of understand that idea, I feel like people would look at things entirely differently. That's something that really.
Yeah, you probably saw one of the quotes from the Take Control course, is that it helped me realise what I can control and what I can't. And that's the first thing we do in the Take Control course. We have the continuum of 0, not at all, to 10 extremely, and you just list lots of things on different post-it notes, and just can engage in experience of how much you can control each of those things. Perceptual control theory is not about saying we have to control everything all the time. It's about saying we need to work out what matters to us and control what matters to us. And that's essentially what you're asking in a meta level session is, how's that going? How does that work? Is that what you want? How important is that to you? How bothered are you by that? And how bothered are you about that compared to that? So it's an entirely relativistic process. So yeah, I think it probably fits with what you're saying.
Thanks for doing what you're doing. I think if people just hear this, I feel like they're going to look at life entirely differently, whether they do extensive research or not. The basic idea, I feel like, really does change the way you look at things. So that's cool.
I hope so.
Any more questions? Okay.
You probably can't see me from there. Hey, Warren, it's
Hi.
Shirley Roy. How are you?
Hi.
I'm tweeting you, so I tagged you. So I have a quick question about your Take Control course. We've done a lot of work here in the U.S. on similar things, both in the jail or in prisons and also in schools. Is there
Wow.
a way we could have a dialogue or a discussion or take a look at the similarities and difference between what you've been doing with that and what we've done here?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just send me a link to your materials and then we can just have a chat about it.
Okay. All right, great.
Cool.
And if you have a question, it's really okay. So, more questions? Okay. We can wrap it up, Warren, except I wanted to ask if you could mention about Tom Schulte and the American Cybernetics Conference and what he was talking about. That would be great.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so Tom Schulte is organising the American Cybernetics Conference for next year, 2019, to be held in Vancouver. I don't know, I've not got the dates to hand. I think it's in June. And he's going to have a stream on a tribute to Bill Powers and revisiting Bill Powers at the ASC, at the American Society of Cybernetics. So that's going to happen. And as many PCT researchers who are interested, it would be great if they join in with Tom on that stream of the conference.
Are you going?
Are you going?
Are you going?
Tom has applied for some funding for me to go to it and to train up his facilitators in his acting facilitators and method levels. So if I get that money, then I'll be going.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, then that's it. That's all.
Okay, is that all, Warren? Is that all?
I'm fine with that, yeah. And everyone okay with me putting this on YouTube?
Yes.
Super.
And one more question.
Oh.
So this is Gary Zico.
Hi, Gary.
Think of Bill in the Navy on the warships and figuring out how those guns can be pointed with servo mechanisms, and then developing PCT, understanding it, and what you guys are doing is just amazing. The power of this idea coming from war guns to working with with schools and all this stuff. I'm flabbergasted. So just keep it up. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, people might not know this here, but I discovered PCT through Gary Zico's book, Without Miracles. So it all comes around.
Yeah, well, I don't have the dates in my head, but we want to mention the conference next year that we understand you are.
Yep. So we're going to hold this conference in Manchester in September. I think it's the second week of September next year, and we would hope for a nice turnout because we've got a lot of students over the last decade that have been taught about perceptual control theory and trained in method levels, so it should be quite a vibrant conference.
That's great. I believe the dates are the 11th through the 15th.
That's it. Thank you, Ali.
Maureen, what is the cybernetic conference again? The dates in June?
I'm afraid I haven't got immediate access to those, but they'll be online, or Tom will have access to those.
They just said end of June. So. Yeah, they just mentioned end of June, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Has anybody told you that you are vice president of the IUPCT?
Oh, has that happened? Oh, right. Super. It's gone through.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I'll have to get involved in some decision making now. But it helps to be heading towards the conference in the UK and having that. But I'm sure I'll distribute it amongst a few of us over in Manchester and Sheffield who are, are just really, just working on this day in, day out. So, yeah.
We'll see you at our next board meeting.
Yes, exactly. Skype is really works well.
Just blindingly terrific work. Thrilled with what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, I really enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody. And I look forward to seeing a lot of you in person at some point soon. All right. Cheers then.